My name's Irralee Andrzejowska, physiotherapist and SIRPA practitioner, and I'm joined again with Lorna Nicholson, nurse and SIRPA practitioner colleague, for part 2 video on her discussion about long COVID. The first video you may have seen was about understanding the symptoms of long COVID through the lens of the nervous system being in dysregulation and fear mode. And today we're going to move on from that information, and I'll hand over to Lorna to explain what she wants to talk about today. So welcome, Lorna.
Thank you. So this video is, we're going to focus a little bit more about what you can do about it to move you along on your healing journey.
Great. I'm sure people are very excited to know about that. First of all, just to talk about, some interesting point about the research about long COVID is suggesting that long COVID is less common in the Omicron variant than in Delta or more recent variants. And why do you think this might be the case?
So this is a recent study that's been published that I found particularly interesting. So around 4% of Omicron cases result in long COVID at 4 weeks compared to 11% of the Delta cases. So basically, there's more long COVID that has come about from the early variants of COVID versus the more recent variants. So when you go back to when COVID first started in sort of March 2020, when we're all told to go home, close the door, don't go out, there was a massive societal fear. This is a collective trauma that we have lived through. And the fear was just huge amongst people. And I do believe that this fear has been one of the huge influencing factors about people, particularly around the early days, developing symptoms of long COVID. Whereas when you think of where we're at now, we're vaccinated, we're doing our life more normally, we're going out and about, we're socializing, and the restrictions have been lifted. The fear has reduced significantly with that, which is why I partly believe that there's less long COVID developing in the more recent variants. And also linked with that is the vaccine. There's also evidence that the vaccine is protective against developing symptoms of long COVID. Now, I would argue that it's not the vaccine itself, but it's more the impact of the vaccine in terms of reducing fear. So I was involved in vaccinating in the early days, so right early on. And I just remember people coming out of the house, coming to the surgery to be vaccinated. And for them, you just saw this relief lifted off them. It was like, for me, this is my freedom. I'm going to get a bit of protection here. And it was a really significant day to be part of that. And you can just see how fear was reduced significantly with just having a vaccine. It felt like people were starting to get their life back, and they were going to move forward.
Yeah. And as we know, as SIRPA practitioners, chronic symptoms are an epidemic of fear, and it makes sense that to make that link between fear and symptoms and potential for long COVID.
Yeah.
What's the advice being currently offered by the NHS, and should someone who feels they are suffering symptoms of COVID seek out medical advice?
So I would say yes. If you have symptoms, first step is see your GP. They will do some basic investigations to rule out other causes. So the GP might refer you to a long COVID clinic. There are a number of long COVID clinics around the country. They're of varying quality, but you just have to take what you can get from what is offered to you. So the GP will rule out other causes of symptoms. If you get referred to a long COVID clinic, accept what they offer. Medication has a place. It can just help you start to feel a little bit better to then be able to do some of the other work and some of the other suggestions that I'm going to give you to help you move forward. So investigations, you may receive a number of investigations, that's fine. Most people I've come across and worked with, the investigations are normal. So they do a basic batch of investigations, and if they're normal, it gets to the point where you just need to accept that there is no physical cause for these symptoms. But for some people, they're so determined to find a physical cause that they keep digging. They are requesting this investigation, this scan, this blood test, and believing there must be something physical going on. And if you keep digging, maybe I'll find the physical explanation for this. But the reality is that the more you dig, you will find an abnormality. But that abnormality might be a normal variant, and it might not actually be the cause of the symptoms. So it gets to the point where you just need to accept that there is no identifiable physical cause for your symptoms. Your body is not broken, and that's the starting point of then moving forward with this.
Yeah. And you can understand why people keep digging and keep going tests, because of our Western belief that if we're suffering with something, there must be a physical reason for it. But it's accepting that once the physical reason has been eliminated, that you still have, there's still another explanation for these real physiological symptoms, which is where the mind-body perspective and approach can come in at this gap point here to fill in that knowledge and therefore inform what happens. So what is it about the mind-body approach, and how would it approach the long COVID symptoms?
So the first thing I want to say is the symptoms are real. What you're experiencing, they're real symptoms. And you can, there are investigations, like if you think with POTS, there is a measurable abnormality in the heart rate response. So there's something physiological going on with the body. But the mind and the body cannot be separated. So that we think of it as psychophysiological or neurophysiological or mind-body. And even those terms kind of separates things out. So it's just thinking of it as everything is just so interlinked, and you can't separate the two. So when we think of what are we trying to achieve, how is this approach going to help symptoms of long COVID? Going back to the first video, is often the nervous system in somebody with long COVID is on high alert, in a fight-flight state all the time, looking for perceived or real threats that probably aren't there. So the first thing we want to do is try and calm down the nervous system to bring us back into what I call the green zone, so more of a parasympathetic state, where we're calm, connected, settled, grounded, can be our true compassionate self and present in the current moment. So sometimes we want to try and work out, well, what is the origin of these symptoms? Where are they coming from? So we've talked previously about current life stresses, we've talked about personality traits, and sometimes these things are often rooted in childhood adverse experiences that will create a behavior pattern throughout our life that keeps on repeating itself. So exploring and finding those origins can be really beneficial. So recovery is possible. There is no quick fix. I've had people say to me, I want to be better in 6 months, and they're giving themselves a time scale. It doesn't work like that. This is a journey of healing. There is no pill that's going to just sort this all out. So just be prepared to go on a journey and give yourself the time it's going to take, as long as it's going to take. So just relax into that and go with it.
Great. And it's that good news that that the nervous system is plastic, and that's what we're working with, is the nervous system. So this is where the potential for recovery can come from, can't it?
Yeah.
And that, like you say, lots of things influence the nervous system and its reactivity. So it's not just one thing causing the fear. You know, there's multiple things involved, and that's why it takes time to work through these things. But it can all be done, of course. And just like you say, setting that expectation that it's not a quick fix, and that multiple areas will happen. I often like to say to people, I can't teach you Spanish in a 1 hour, we know that to learn a language, we have to put a certain amount of time and learn all the different variations, just to give people the concept that there's different aspects and things that have to come together to achieve the final sort of resolution. How important is belief in the mind, body, or the nervous system role in long COVID for someone's recovery, would you say?
So this is a great starting point. So there's a bit of a spectrum. So I often say to people, where are you on this mind-body spectrum? What do you believe is causing your symptoms? Are you digging for a physical explanation? Are you willing to consider that maybe the symptoms are due to dysregulated nervous system, immune system, resulting in past or current stresses? Where are you on that spectrum? And the first stage of recovery is being willing to accept that, yes, the mind and body are connected. And actually, yes, maybe all this stuff that has gone on in my life is the influencing factor of developing these symptoms at this time. The people who are very fixed on the biomedical model, I don't see as good results with, because they're holding on to that. That's their belief. So just starting to challenge your belief and just start to be a bit more curious about why these symptoms might be there. Yeah,
that's right. Because it is asking people to change a big belief, and the first stage, like I say, is that curiosity and learning from other people's stories that have, recovered with this approach can be really inspirational. So, and at first people, even it's just looking for an opening that you can start to work with, because you can't work with the mind-body techniques if the belief isn't that it's mind-body at all. That's got to be the first hurdle to work past and support someone with. So if someone suffering long COVID gets to the point where they are open to and accept the nervous system, the survival nervous system's role in their symptoms, and that the mind is involved with the physiology of the body, where do you go from there?
So belief is absolutely the starting point. And then I would say for everybody, it's starting to surrender to the symptoms. So quite often people are so determined, or some people go into denial. It's like, I should be able to do this. And they push themselves or try to push themselves through. So it's kind of stopping and reevaluating. That's the first part, accepting this is where my body is at right now. And it's starting to listen to your body. What is your body needing from you right now? And if that is not to do very much, then accept that. So stop pushing through, stop fighting to hold on to your old life, which is what a lot of people do. And they push and push, and they find themselves getting worse and more fatigued. There's a little sentence by Carl Jung who says, what you resist will persist. I quite like that. There is in the long COVID world a lot of talk about pacing, which the principle of it is, okay, it's time to stop, work out your energy envelope. So we'll talk a little bit more about pacing as we go through, but start to take notice of that advice and start to pull back on what you're doing, start to work out what you can and can't do, and find that point of rest. And then with these symptoms, just start to sit with and be with those symptoms. Notice them without judgment, without fear. And be curious, start asking, well, what is this symptom showing me? What is it protecting me from? Howard Schubiner has a bit of a sentence. He says, your body was knocking to let you know that something was bothering you, but you didn't understand it. So it knocked louder and louder by creating more pain or a new symptom. When you didn't listen, it rang the doorbell, and finally it threw a rock through the window to get your attention. And I think that's a really good summary as often what happens. So these physical symptoms are trying to tell you something. It's your body trying to tell you, but it's starting to be curious and consider what might that be at this time for you.
That's right. And it's coming to that understanding that what's going on in our body is not happening to you, it's happening for you. It's a message. And rather than fighting the messenger or shutting down the messenger, resisting, creating more fight and flight, which is that what you say, that denial, that pushing through and trying to ignore it or avoid it or numb it. Yeah. It's actually, like you say, having to slow down and turn towards it curiously and in a sort of exploratory, open-minded way to learn what it is that is trying to be communicated via our bodily symptoms, because that's where the information is. It's trying to tell you what you need, and it's learning how to interpret that with the mind-body approach and the nervous system approach, isn't it? One of the tools I know that we use and interested to know about the use in long COVID as well is the Therapeutic Journaling tool. Do you got some information about what that is and learning about what these symptoms are in their body?
Yeah. So journaling is a super powerful tool. So it's something I ask all my clients to at least try. It can give insight and perspective into situations. It can help bring what is subconscious to the conscious. So a lot of what is going on is probably subconscious. So the first thing is to bring into conscious being. When it's in your conscious being, then you can do something with it. Nicole Sachs, she talks a lot about this. She talks about it as journal speak. She says it's vomiting on paper. So it's getting what's in your head out on paper. And where to start, Nicole Sachs would suggest writing 3 columns. So what's going on in your life currently that might be causing you stress? What are some of the personality traits that might be causing you stress? And also childhood events that you're consciously aware of that might be influencing. And then when you start to write, it's not just writing a story, it's about how do you feel? So putting yourself in that situation as a child, in your stressful situations that's going on in your life currently, how does it make you feel? And this is one of the important things. And then it's allowing yourself to feel those feelings, not just say, I felt angry, but okay, what does anger feel like? So really start to go there. So that's kind of how to start with it. And it's also putting things in perspective. So maybe looking at a situation from different perspectives. So not your perspective, but what about the perspective of another person? So just looking at it from lots of different perspectives, being curious about situations. One thing to think about is how much time do you spend journaling? And that's very individual. Nicole Sachs would say 20 minutes every day. I would say, well, for somebody with long COVID, that's actually quite a lot of energy, a lot of spoons. So you need to work out what is the right amount of time for you in a week. But I would say is quite often what happens is you start to write, you get to the point where you think, I've written everything and I'm off. But actually it's in there. If you give yourself a 10-minute time slot, you might write for 5 minutes and then just wait. And often then another layer might show itself. So having a bit of a time scale with it can be useful, and just try and stick to that time scale, whatever would be right for you. So one thing I do with everyone who has symptoms of long COVID is I get them to start with writing about the time when COVID started in the UK, then globally. How did they feel about it? What was going on in their life? When they then got COVID, how did they feel about getting COVID? And with nearly everyone, there was just so much fear. Again, it comes back to the fear. So write about that fear. How did it feel? What were you afraid of? Again, putting in some sort of perspective, and it's just bringing all of that out to the open. How did you feel about lockdown? What was your responses to that? So that's always my start point with somebody who has symptoms of long COVID. What are these symptoms? And another way you can write is writing to the symptoms. It might be fatigue, it might be brain fog. and sort of asking the questions with curiosity. What are you serving me? How are you serving me? What's hidden behind this fatigue? What are you trying to tell me? What is it protecting you from? So again, this sitting with the symptom, being curious, without judgment, without pushing away, but just start asking the questions.
Yeah.
And you might start to get some insight through the journaling. Another journaling tool is to write unsent letters. So there might be a relationship that's been difficult in your past or currently, and just imagining what do you want to say to that person if you could. You don't send it, you just write it. Again, it's vomiting on paper, but also putting it in perspective, and that can be quite releasing for a lot of people, just to get that out and speak your mind. So I always say to start with something current. So don't go straight to the awful childhood trauma, but start with your current life situations and things that are not super triggering for you. So start with the easy. So you're just starting to practice and develop this skill. I do accept that journaling is not for everybody, and that's okay. There are other ways of achieving the same things, and lots of people have recovered from all sorts of health issues through alternative means. Sometimes just verbally talking to somebody, sometimes speaking to yourself, recording it. And there are other ways. I'm not a journaler. I don't think I ever will be. But I know I've seen resolution of symptoms in my life, but there's other ways. So don't feel pressured that, oh, I need to journal, but give it a go. It might be for you, and it can work really well in terms of insights for those who give it a good go.
That's right. I think, with all things in life, there's no one thing fits all. And journaling, like you say, can be a very, very useful tool for people it works for. And you don't know if it's going to work for you until you try it. So it's all about trying it. It's free, it's accessible, and to putting aside that resistance and talking yourself out of it before you can't really assess if it's for you or not until you give it a go, because we think we know what's going on in our head, but until you put pen to paper and just let the hand go and go and go, often the greatest insights are things when information pops up that surprises the person writing even. And that's when you're getting into that free flow state of writing, so you're not controlling it with your conscious mind so much, then you're more likely to get information to come up below the conscious mind, which is defending you from it. And the journaling gives you also that opportunity to practice accessing feeling emotions and take away the fear of being with your emotions, which may have been conditioned into your nervous system. So clearly fear is a big part of all chronic conditions, and especially seems obvious in long COVID symptoms. So what can we do about this fear?
So the first thing is start to acknowledge the fears. And you might find that there are certain activities that you are avoiding. So it might be you don't want to go outside. So what you might say to somebody, particularly at the moment, is that it's too hot, or I don't feel like it today. So there's what is the sort of conscious what gets communicated, but then start asking yourself, okay, what is the real reason behind this? And often there's another layer to this. And it might be, I don't want to go out to the shops today in case I feel dizzy, or in case the fatigue overwhelms me, or in case I pass out. So there's often a fear behind the reason why we may or may not be doing something. Or it might be everything in you is, I don't want to go back to work, or the symptoms are just too much, I couldn't go back to work. But actually what your body is saying is, I don't want to go back to that awful stressful work situation that I was in, and these symptoms are now protecting me from that awful work stressful situation, because now I don't need to go back. So just start to be curious about what are your fears here? What are the real fears? And there's nearly always a whole stack of fears. And yeah, it's something to journal about. Just start to be aware of it. Start to think of what is the language you're speaking? What is that actual, what is your heart language? What is your body really trying to say? And sometimes the fears are subconscious. We might not have conscious awareness of them. So again, this is where journaling can be useful. It's trying to tap into what is the undercurrent of the sort of behaviors with this. So be curious, be honest with yourself, notice your fears, and then start to put that into perspective. And what are you really fearful of? And what are the consequences? What might be the consequences? What could you do to reduce that fear? So many people I come across, their life is so limited by fear that they actually reduce their life so much that their kind of circle of doing life becomes smaller and smaller because there is just so much fear in them. And actually, when you start to become aware of that and even challenging some of those fears a little bit, there's a lot of freedom in that. So just be aware of if you're avoiding certain activities. Now, there might be a time that actually at this moment of time, it's not the right thing for you to go and walk a mile. But just start noticing what's going on. What are you afraid of? I know with long COVID, there's lots of talk about post-exertion malaise, which is real. A lot of people are quite afraid of doing something, doing too much, and then being totally exhausted after that. The other side of it is if you don't move at all, you will get deconditioned. So your body will decondition. So there needs to be some movement in your life. Otherwise, the physical deconditioning will have a knock-on effect. So keeping moving is, and so journaling is a really useful tool to start exploring what your fears might be. So notice, start to put your fears in perspective, start to consider what is the worst consequence of that fear, and then start to rationalize it a little bit. Can be tools that might help.
Yeah, because the nature of fear and the nature of growth is we have to, get out of our comfort zone, which may mean facing our fears. And it's just making that a manageable fear. It's choosing a smaller one, feeling a fear that you feel you can be with and achieve, get that little taste of success on the other side of doing the thing that you fear that you've broken back down, and then using that as the next stepping stone to the next little achievement, and building on that in stages, and that's what you can work out where to start from, and finding that starting point to open that cage of fear.
Yeah.
So life is bigger.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I do encourage people to write down their achievements. So if you go out and you walk half a mile, notice that, write it down. It is physically possible. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to do that every day, but just start noticing your milestones. And that can really help and give you some confidence of what is possible.
Yeah, it's just starting somewhere and moving forward. Now, fatigue is a really common symptom in long COVID. How can the mind-body approach help with the fatigue symptoms?
So often people link the fatigue with I've done something physical. I cooked a meal, or I went shopping, I cleaned the house. That's why I'm fatigued. But what I discover more and more is actually the fatigue, the driving force of the fatigue is emotional. So that's either just so many overwhelming emotions in your life currently, or it might be the suppression of emotions. So an emotion that starts to rise up, but it overwhelms you, so you just put the lid on it, push it down, and that's going to drain you of energy. So often it's not the physical, but it's the emotional side of things that is draining you of energy. So we often blame it on the physical or the cognitive, but ignore the emotional side of things. So one thing to that you can do to help and think about this is just start to notice are you suppressing your emotions? Now, emotions, they will rise up and they will hang around for about 90 seconds, and then they will naturally disperse. So it's allowing that emotion to rise up and peak. And if you know it's only 90 seconds, you can do it for 90 seconds. Just allow yourself to experience that motion. Allow it to rise up and then subside. It's a bit like riding a wave. And so just allow yourself to do that. And with emotions, sometimes the first clue that there is an emotion is a sensation in your body. So start noticing noticing what's going on in your body. So somebody might say, my stomach feels knotted, and that for them is actually can be translated as fear. Somebody might have a different sensation, which could actually be translated as another emotion. So the first thing to think about is notice what's going on in your body, notice your body sensations, and then see if you can give that an emotion. The other side of that is you might feel an emotion and you know that's fear, it's anger, it might be a positive emotion like joy. How do you know that you're feeling that emotion? So bring it back to the body and start noticing what's going on in your body. How do you feel fear? How do you feel joy? And then label emotions. So it might start off with a body sensation, and start to give these emotions names. So there's various tools that I use to help people put a name to it. And there's real power in labeling emotions. And for some people, they can feel certain emotions okay, but there are other emotions that they don't allow themselves to feel. Like anger is quite common, that I've had people say, I don't know how to feel anger. And they've suppressed anger so much that they've never allowed that to rise up. So just start to notice if there are certain emotions that you feel very readily, but certain emotions that you just don't know how to feel.
I think it's a big gap in the general knowledge of our culture about emotions and what they are. We've been conditioned that certain ones are right and certain ones are wrong, depending on your sex as well, whether you're male or female. And there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about emotions, and that's why it can also be hard for people to accept that emotions are involved, because it's not something people are familiar with, and therefore don't understand the role of emotions, and how all emotions are normal for humans to feel. And if we're not feeling all emotions, then that's dysregulating. And it's just a big gap in the knowledge of everybody, which when we do this type of work, at first you think, I can understand why people are, what's it got to do with emotions? You know, I'm feeling fatigue, but there is the information and the evidence, neuroscience wise, about the link between emotions and the chemistry and the physiological effect on our nervous system, which then causes symptoms in the body. And there's a verifiable link between that, and this understanding is coming more and more to the fore in the understanding of the nervous system, this emotional link. It's a big area of new understanding for most people, isn't it?
Yeah, so the whole emotional intelligence thing, it is huge, and it's really, really important. Something else linked with emotions is often people think of positive emotions and negative emotions. Now, I don't think of it like that. Is all emotions have a place and need to be felt, and you need to give yourself permission to feel those emotions. So just start to notice that. But I would say there are more certain emotions that will give you life and energy, and there are certain emotions which will deplete you of energy. And so think of it in those terms rather than positive or negative emotions. So all emotions are allowed and need to be felt.
Yeah, and so that's obviously a big topic, but lots of good information out there to help people understand that and work with their emotions, to help regulate the nervous system. What about the role of breathing as a tool to help with symptoms? What place does that hold with the long COVID?
So I'm a bit of a fan of breathing well. And breathing is a super powerful tool to help us regulate our nervous system. So it can help us bring our nervous system into a more parasympathetic state, particularly if you're in constant fight-flight sort of nervous system state. So breathing is another massive subject that I won't talk too much about, but the basics of breathing is we want to breathe in and out through our nose, breathing slow, using the belly abdominal breathing rather than upper chest breathing, and breathing lighter, so breathing a little bit less. So often people I work with long COVID, their breathing is very upper chest, so there's a lot of upper chest movement going on. They're breathing faster, they're taking in too much air and getting rid of too much carbon dioxide. So there's a lot out there on breathing for long COVID. One thing I found is a lot of the stuff that's put out there can be too hard for you. So the starting point is just too hard. So I often have people say, I've been doing the breathing exercises, but I feel dizzy, or I feel uncomfortable, or I feel like I need to gasp. If that's you, then it's probably too hard. So it's kind of working out. So this is where working with somebody who can help you work out what you need for yourself is the most ideal scenario. So if you start doing some exercises and you feel your breathing is dysregulated, develop symptoms, then you're probably not doing something right. So try and find somebody who you can work with.
Do you think people, I mean, obviously dysregulated breathing is a common factor in people with any type of chronic condition, but in relation to long COVID, do you believe it's because of the effect of COVID on people's lungs, or it's the fear causing the breathing pattern that they're having with long COVID?
Yeah. So I would suggest it's to do with the nervous system state that's causing the breathing pattern disorder. So most people, their breathing probably wasn't right beforehand, but they probably didn't notice. But so many people with ongoing COVID symptoms just say their breathing doesn't feel right. That's a common thing that people say to me. And when you look at what goes on with the sympathetic fight-flight, breathing becomes through the mouth, it becomes faster, it becomes using your accessory. These are your emergency breathing muscles. And they start to become activated. So it fits in very much with a sort of sympathetic response to a situation. So it ties in. So this is a physiological response to what's going on with the nervous system. So on one level, we can retrain the breathing, but on the other level, we need to work out, well, why is the breathing dysregulated in the first place?
Yes, that's all tied up with fatigue as well, because breathing in a sympathetic state is inefficient and exhausting.
Yes.
And equally, you can get more energy by improving your breathing and
massively
also reduce your nervous system state. It's all tied up together.
It's totally tied up. Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a powerful tool, even though it's just breathing. It's influencing your energy store system and your immune system and your nervous system. So it's not just breathing, it's a pivotal physiological thing that we can have conscious control over, which can therefore have a big impact on our physiology and our symptoms. And again, another free, easy tool, accessible when you know what to do with that. Another tool is visualization, and how can this be used with long COVID symptoms?
So it's a super powerful tool. I had a lovely chat with a lady today who she's been using visualization techniques to help with the symptoms of long COVID and has seen significant improvement of symptoms by using this technique. So you might want to start, so the mind doesn't know the difference between what's imaginary and real. So you're kind of tricking your mind. So there might be a task that you want to do, like you want to cook a meal. So you can start by spending some time visualizing that task, whatever you want to achieve. So picture yourself there doing the task, use your senses. So what do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What does it feel like when you touch? So use all your senses in that visualization. And visualize yourself doing the task, you're doing it well, you don't have any symptoms, you're just functioning normally. And also visualize yourself completing the task and then what it feels like afterwards. How do you feel afterwards? Without symptoms, a sense of satisfaction, eating the food. So spending time just visualizing some of these activities you would like to do, but maybe you haven't been able to do, or there's a fear stopping you from doing these activities, is a super powerful tool. So that's one way to use visualization in terms of tasks that you want to achieve. How can you achieve it? But it can also be used to help regulate the nervous system. So if you're starting to feel a bit dysregulated, a bit in a sympathetic state, you can use visualization to take yourself to a sort of safe place. So you might have, there might be a place that you know when you go to that place, so you might physically go there, or you can go there in your mind, it feels safe. You can be there, you feel relaxed, all the tension in your body goes, you feel energized. So you can spend time in those places as well, just being in those places of safety in your, so it might be a real place that you have nice memories of. It might be an imaginary place that you can just picture. So it can just help you come back into your green zone, your parasympathetic state. Or you can use it to as one of my clients said, she's traveled around the world visualizing and had great fun in the process, just taking herself to all these places around the world, even though when she started this, her body, the fatigue was so overwhelming, she couldn't imagine being able to do this. Just a few quotes about visualization. When you visualize, you materialize. So visualization is daydreaming with a purpose. So visualize the things you want, see it, feel it, believe it, make your mental blueprint and begin to build.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem, is people are visualizing all the time, but they're visualizing worst case scenario, how it's all going to go wrong, and therefore inevitably it will fulfill that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
athletes use visualization.
Yeah.
And if you're on the top of a 10-meter board and you visualize all the things that could go wrong in that dive, well, you guarantee they're probably going to go wrong. So it's developing that mindset of, if I can visualize the optimum dive, or how I want this activity to go, I wake up those neural circuits and create that possibility that will be my experience. But if I've already predicted it's going to go wrong and be bad, and I'm going to be tired and it's going to be hard, you've just visualized the opposite, and that will become what happens. And then it does, and it's reinforced, and it's snapping out of the negative visualizations, if you like, realizing I can choose to put in a positive visualization, and which may change my experience and be a first step towards coming out of it.
So another super powerful tool that can be used that could make a difference.
Another free, easy one to do, with no side effects. And all these tools are accessible to people with a bit of guidance, a bit of knowledge about their place, and are self-directed. No one can visualize for you, no one can breathe for you, no one can have your emotions or journal for you. And and this should be good information that these are all tools. I can learn these skills and I can apply them to myself in the way that suits me best. And this is a powerful thing, which is very different about mind-body medicine. It's that self-empowerment, isn't it? What do you mean about a growth mindset, and how can that affect and be and used in recovery from long COVID?
Yeah. So this is something that, or the fixed mindset is what bothers me a little bit about some of the stuff that's out there with long COVID. So an example is there's a lot of talk about heart rate monitoring. So keeping your heart rate below your anabolic threshold. So for me, it might be about 95. But what you're doing here, you're fixing something. Actually, the reality is our heart is designed to pump, it's designed to go faster, it's designed to, when you move, to respond. So if you're only ever going to allow your heart rate to go up to a certain point, and you're constantly watching this generates more fear and anxiety. And I've spoke to so many people about this who says, it just makes me feel anxious. And actually, I think this is not a helpful tool, even though there's a lot of talk about it. So that's an example of a fixed mindset. So actually what we need to do is ditch the monitoring and kind of tap into more how we feel with things like that. And if you feel your heart going fast, it's just saying to yourself, no, it's okay. The heart's designed to do that. It's not going to explode. It's not going to break. It's okay. And I know if somebody has POTS or so a heart rate that's responding inappropriately, it feels quite alarming and it can be quite frightening in itself. But when you start to monitor that, that can become more alarming. So just think about that in terms of monitoring and this focus on keeping a heart rate to below a certain threshold. Another example of this fixed mindset versus growth mindset is with pacing. Nothing wrong with pacing, but again, if you start saying to yourself, I can only walk 500 meters, that's a fixed mindset. You will only walk 500 meters. So it's just being careful to not set yourself certain fixed parameters to work with. It's more thinking of that, see that those boundaries as blurred, that, okay, that I might be able to do this much today, but let's just see it as a bit of a more fluctuating thing, that it's not fixed. And every now and then you might want to go beyond that boundary. Every now and then you might want to go less than that boundary, but just be aware. I've seen this so many times. Somebody gets to like, I've walked 500 meters, they stop. And it's like, I can't go any further. So this fixed mindset can be really unhelpful. And I think it's one of the things that might hold people back from recovery, because they've developed these mindsets. Another example is somebody was told by a medical professional, don't stand for more than 5 minutes because you'll get symptoms. So already you get to 5 minutes and your brain goes, I'm going to get symptoms now. I mustn't stand for more than 5 minutes. So again, it's generating fear rather than thinking, okay, well, some days I can stand longer than other days, and let's just go with the flow and see what happens. Just thinking about similar sort of theme is some of the information out there. So another example is restrictive diets. So having a low histamine diet is quite common out there with long COVID. I have a concern on that because again, it's narrowing your world, your life. It's creating further limitations. It's limiting your food groups. So some people are restricting their diet so much, they're actually cutting out key food groups, which actually your body needs. So a lot of these restrictive type advice that's out there, I think can be unhelpful. So just be aware of that.
It's that balanced approach. And we understand that diet, affects our health. And when it starts to become an extreme diet with rules and fears and limitations to life, then it's actually having the opposite effect on our physiology.
Absolutely.
For this situation. What about support groups? Are they helpful? Do you recommend people join a support group?
I mean, it's been incredible the way support groups have developed around long COVID. Thousands of people in them. So they have their place, but the people who seem to do better are actually the people who come out of support groups, because what they find is that they're sucked into the biomedical model or sucked into the sort of negativity around the condition. Some people find them helpful, some people not helpful. And it's also how much time do you spend sort of reading and focusing on the symptoms and what might help and what's helped this person and that person. So just be aware for yourself, what is the right thing to do for yourself? I know for me, I found it really helpful to come out of support groups just to normalize my life. So just be aware of that, and it's something to consider. Are these support groups helpful or are they hindering you in some way?
Yes, because I can see there could be a trap where you're just exposed to other people's fears. You can adopt their fears.
Yes.
But there is a support group, which a website, I believe, that is full of success stories. So it's not a group of people who are all suffering, but a group of people who have put up their stories and as a source of and support and inspiration that, you know, this is what I did, this is how I did it. So there's sort of more solution and inspiration based information rather than, you know, comparing of symptoms and sharing in fears.
Totally. So I'll put a link to that website, which has just got some amazing stories of recovery. There are Facebook groups out there focused on that. So just consider what are you being part of? What are you feeding your mind? Is it helpful? Is it not at this time?
That's right, because there's support groups and there's support groups. It's being discerning about that and deciding what is the right thing, and is it making me feel more fearful, or is it actually giving me more inspiration and support with that. Excellent. What's your thoughts on people working with a therapist for their long COVID?
So I think because the mind and body are so interconnected, working with a therapist is a great idea. And ideally, you want somebody who understands the physiology and understands what's going on with from a symptom point of view, but also understands what's going on from the psychological point of view as well. The NHS offers CBT if you're lucky. I'm not sure how helpful that is. If that's all you can get, take what you can from it. I think it can help you move forward a bit, but I don't think it's the optimal option. The NHS also offers for some people ACT, which is acceptance commitment therapy, which is a really positive step in the right direction. But it's actually, I mean, even to get CBT on the NHS is actually quite difficult. So to get ACT is like, I don't know what you need to do to get ACT. So unfortunately, a lot of good therapy, you need to go outside the NHS. And then if you're looking for a therapist, ideally you want somebody who uses an integrative approach. So they use many different approaches. They're not just fixed on CBT or this approach or that approach, but they can draw from lots of different approaches. So a lot wider with what they do. And ideally you want to work with somebody who will work cognitively, but they also acknowledge and work with the emotional side of things, and also work from a somatic side of things. And this is where you work with the body. So often trauma, things that have happened to us are sort of stored in our body. So they like create trauma imprints. And if you're in your head and just cognitive about it, you never really get to the root of it. So working with somebody who can work with all those modalities is ideally what you're looking for. Unfortunately, these people aren't easy to find. So you might need to work with a therapist who can take you so far, but stick with that therapist to take you as far as they can. Then you might need to find a different therapist who, say, can work with you on a somatic body level, if that's what's required. So just be open to that. I would say try not to just shop around therapists. So pick one, stick with it for a duration, whatever that is, rather than have a session, think, no, they're not for me, or find a reason that it's not working, then go to another therapist. So just stick with it, but you might need to use a number of different modalities depending what you need.
And like I say, some people, of course, may not need a therapist. They maybe take on these tools and feel they can use them and they see the results, and that's okay. And a certain proportion of people that they may not need any more than the information, the tools, and then putting them into practice to have the results. And then there's other people who feel they need more guidance than that and more support along that journey. And that's okay. It's understanding what you need.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So finally, Lorna, can you just let us know what you actually offer for people with long COVID and how they could get in touch with you?
So there's a few things I offer. So number one, I work with people one-to-one, talking more about everything we've talked about today. So working with you individually. I also work somatically. So when you feel that you're stuck with something, I can do the somatic work. So I use a modality called embodied processing, which is super powerful. And I've seen amazing results with that. So that's the mind-body work I do. I also can offer breathing re-education. So looking at your breathing pattern and provide a structured program for you to re-educate your breathing. And then I have a Pilates class for people with POTS, long COVID, chronic fatigue, and all the sort of associated conditions.
Is that online or in person?
Yeah. So it's an online class. We move a bit. We talk about some of these tools. We do a bit of breathing. So it's just a little snapshot of a lot of what we've talked about today. You just work at your own pace. So there's a few different things, and I will put my website on with the YouTube link if you want to contact me to talk more about what I can offer.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Lorna. That's really interesting information, full of hope and possibility. And I hope that anybody listening today, if they can be inspired, that there is hope and there are techniques and there are people to support them, for them to reach out and explore, and wish them well on their recovery journey. So thank you for being with me to share your knowledge and information.
Thank you.
Bye for now.